Hi everyone. Now we are on the last part of chapter 4, and this chapter is primarily concerning tissues, and part C is the very end. We're starting at slide number 40 in the PowerPoint for parts B and C, and this is on membranes and tissue repair. So the body has covering and lining membranes of various types. Each type of membrane, though, will be composed of at least 2 primary tissue types. So therefore, we call them organs. Each membrane consists of an epithelium bound to connective tissue. There are 3 major types of membrane in the body: cutaneous membrane, which is actually on the outside of the body, the mucous membrane, and serous membrane, and we will discuss each of these. So cutaneous membrane is your skin. It covers the entire surface of the body, and it's composed of the epidermis, which consists of a keratinized, remember these cells are dry, they are filled with the protein keratin, and actually the outer surface consists of dead cells. So the epidermis has keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. That's what it consists of, many layers of flattened cells. The dermis, which is just deep to the epidermis, is a thick layer of connective tissue, and this cutaneous membrane is generally dry. And here is an illustration showing you a cutaneous membrane. They're pointing to it. It covers the entire body. Mucous membranes, also known as mucosae, you may have heard the term mucosa, singular. When we add an E, it becomes plural. So mucous membranes are also known as mucosae. So, and again, mucosa is plural for mucosa. Mucosae line the body cavities that are open to the exterior. A layer of epithelium lies over a layer of connective tissue, and this connective tissue is known as the lamina propria. The cells here, the epithelial cells particularly, secrete mucus. Actually, there are cells interspersed among the epithelial lining that produce and secrete mucus. Therefore, we call them mucous membranes. And here is a figure that shows you mucous membranes. We have the mucosa of the nasal cavity, and it continues down through the respiratory tract. And then we have the mucosa of the mouth, the esophagus, and throughout the gastrointestinal tract. We also have mucous membrane on the urinary system, and also parts of the reproductive systems. Serous membranes. Serous membranes are also called serosi. These line the ventral body cavities, that means the ones in front of the area where the spinal cord and the brain are kept. Serosi consist of simple squamous epithelium, which is known as mesothelium, that lines areolar connective tissue. And there's 2 layers of this. The one layer is called the parietal serosi that line the body chamber, and then there's the visceral serosi, which cling very tightly to the internal organs. Another name for internal organs are viscera. So visceral serosi are the closest to the organs. Parietal serosi cling to the chamber in which those organs are held. These epithelial layers of the serous membranes secrete what's known as a serous fluid. It's a thin fluid. It's thinner than mucus, actually, but it does have the same general function, and that is to prevent friction, to protect organs. And here's a figure of serous membranes. Serous membranes line the body cavities that are closed to the exterior. So here we see we have pleura. Pleura are the serous membranes that line the lungs. The parietal pleura cling to the thoracic cavity inside, and then the visceral pleura is this little layer right here. These are indicated in a fuchsia color. The visceral pleura cling to the lungs. Over here, this is the heart, of course, and we have a serous membrane that goes around the heart. And again, these are double membranes. The parietal pericardium clings to the area outside where the heart is sitting, and then the visceral pericardium clings very tightly to the heart itself. And then between these two layers, as is also true with the pleura, there's a thin layer of fluid, serous fluid, that when these organs are moving, that lubricates them and keeps them from damaging themselves during that movement. This is called the parietal peritoneum. So in the abdominal cavity, we have the peritoneum, and the parietal peritoneum clings to the abdominal cavity. The visceral peritoneum clings to the internal organs themselves. Tissue repair. So this is talking about tissue repair. It's not really directly a specific kind of tissue, but it's talking about what happens if tissue is damaged. And again, it may be more than one tissue type that's involved. But what happens is the cells, particularly with the epithelial cells, they need to divide and migrate to their proper locations. There's actually two major ways that tissue repairs itself. One is with regeneration, and that's actually replacing those cells. And then fibrosis. This would involve some scarring, actually. So we have various steps here, and I do want you to know the steps. The steps in tissue repair. Step 1, inflammation. Inflammation will set the stage. We generally don't think of inflammation as a good thing, but it allows your body to fight some kind of an infection that might be setting in. So what happens is you have an increase of inflammatory chemicals that are released by cells there, and this causes the blood vessels here to dilate. And so the blood vessels become more permeable. The permeability increases, and this allows fluid to seep out of the teeny blood vessels, such as the capillaries, and it also allows white blood cells to come out from the bloodstream and enter the tissues where they can fight the infection. It also is going to initiate blood clotting, which is a separate process. It is not considered inflammation, but this process of blood clotting will start once at the same time that inflammation occurs. And here's the illustration. 1, inflammation sets the stage. You get severed blood vessels. Right here, you can see there is a wound. Inflammatory chemicals are released. The local blood vessels here become more permeable, allowing white blood cells, fluid, and clotting proteins and other plasma proteins to seep into that injured area. Clotting will occur, and the surface will dry to form a scab. So that is the first step. Step 2. This is called organization. Organization restores the blood supply. The clot that had been formed with that initial step is going to be replaced by what we call granulation tissue. The epithelium will regenerate. Fibroblasts here, which are in the connective tissue in that area, such as the dermis, for example, if it's a cut on your skin. The collagen fibers here will be produced by these fibroblasts to bridge the gap. Also, you'll have white blood cells, macrophages, which are going to come around to the site and phagocytize any kind of cellular debris, dead cells, any kind of bacteria, etc., that may be in the area. And this is showing you organization. It restores the blood supply. The clot's replaced by granulation tissue, which they're showing you right here. It restores the vascular supply. Fibroblasts, which are indicated right here, they are going to now produce and secrete collagen fibers. which is a tough protein that is going to bridge the gap. And this is also where you may see a wound, like a smooth area at the site of the wound, which will be healed, but it'll actually be an interruption between epithelial cells. Macrophages are going to phagocytize the dead and dying cells and other debris, and the surface epithelial cells multiply and migrate over the granulation tissue. So if the epithelial cells migrate to completely seal that, you may not see a scar underneath, but there will be a little scar under there because there really are the cells in the connective, there's very few cells in the connective tissue, but connective tissue can heal itself here, the dermis right here, by increasing the production of collagen fibers. Step 3, this is called regeneration and fibrosis. The scab is going to detach, fibrous tissue matures and the epithelium thickens, and this is now going to begin to resemble the adjacent tissue. Fully regenerated epithelium will be forming, and then you may have scar tissue underneath that, or even visible if the wound is not completely approximated. In other words, it didn't come all the way together properly. Tissue repair, regeneration, and fibrosis here effect, that means they cause the permanent repair. The fibrosed area matures and contracts, epithelium thickens, and a fully regenerated epithelium with an underlying area of scar tissue here is the result. Keep in mind that different tissues regenerate at different rates, and so they have different capacities to actually regenerate. Those tissues that regenerate extremely well include all of the epithelia, blood-forming tissue, bone, and areolar connective tissue. Limited regenerating capacity would include smooth muscle, dense and regular connective tissue, and virtually no regenerative capacity occurs with the neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. There is some argument about this currently, though, as far as if there is ever mitosis of neurons during a repair of the brain, but it's always commonly been believed that neurons that have been damaged in the brain will not regenerate. And then we're looking here, I really like embryonic development. It's fascinating and quite complex, and we talk about an embryo when it's very young. It doesn't look anything like a human body, but this is really early so that you can see there's actually just several layers of tissues, and after a zygote forms, which is a fertilized egg cell, that completed combination of chromosomes in the nucleus, each one of those chromosomes will multiply or duplicate, and then we have mitosis, where that single cell forms 2 daughter cells, and each of those cells forms 4, and each cell, remember, has the complete set of chromosomes. So initially it's just a cluster of cells, but then we have the development of what we call 3 primary germ layers: ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Ecto means outside on the surface, meso or meso means the middle, and then endoderm would be the inner layer. Scientists have been studying what are the chemical signaling messages that are sent out to allow the development first of these 3 primary germ layers, and then how do these tissues specialize in order to form our 4 primary tissue types. If you'll remember the very beginning of chapter 4, we talked about the 4 primary tissue types: epithelial tissues, connective tissues, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. So scientists are beginning to discover that once these 3 primary germ layers form, it's out of these that we have specialization to form the 4 primary tissue types. So here it's showing you epithelium comes from all 3 of the germ layers. We call these primary germ layers. The inner lining of the digestive system is going to come from the endoderm. The nervous system actually comes from the ectoderm, which kind of forms a little cleavage right here, initially forming the brain and spinal cord. And then we have muscle and connective tissue are going to form primarily from the mesoderm or mesoderm. With aging, as in a lot of other situations, tissue function actually slows down somewhat. Our tissues actually function very well during youth, middle age, as long as we have adequate diet and circulation, etc. The epithelia actually will thin with increasing age, and repair becomes less efficient. Bone, muscle, and nervous tissues will atrophy, and as you get older, there are more and more opportunities for DNA mutations to occur, and that's why as we get older, we have a greater risk of developing diseases, including cancers. And that's the end. Have a wonderful day. I will see you with Chapter 5.